Hey, what is up, guys? Big Gamer out here. How are you guys doing today? I'm super, thanks for asking. Welcome, guys, to Raiders of the Worst Game, the series where I hunt down and play the worst games. And so, guys, for today's Raiders of the Worst Game, we have the PlayStation port of Carmageddon, late 97 or early 98 when this game came out. So, even though these aren't the early days of 3D gaming, the genre, the limitations of the hardware were still there. And we're going to jump in with some gameplay. As you can tell, I've cut most of the loading times out, but I've left it in there in bits and pieces just so you can see how slow it is. Now, the first detractor of a game like this is, it runs on quite a small and closed gameplay loop, and the gameplay loop is interrupted regularly by these loading times. As you can see, it is, again, an early 3D game. I actually captured this through a PlayStation 3, which has the PlayStation 1 hardware in it, obviously, so we are seeing true PlayStation 1 footage. But obviously there's a slight amount of upscaling there, which, kind of, to be honest, it kind of lends itself a little bit more to how the PC version looked. Now, what you're seeing is quite rudimentary 3D graphics. Obviously, the textures aren't as smooth, the resolution isn't as good, and there's a lot more pop-in on this version than there was on the PC version. Being a kind of late 90s PC title, 97 was the PC release, this was one of those games that PC owners really went out and kind of, it was pushing like the latest graphics cards. Everyone back then was moving towards, I suppose this was not far from the days of Voodoo and having actually dedicated 3D graphics cards to kind of push your polygons around. And one thing you might notice that is different from the PC to PlayStation releases, the people are these kind of pea green zombies rather than civilians, which this was a controversial game when it came out. Let's remember that this was coming off of the days of like your Dooms and your Resident Evils and stuff, where in the late 90s depicting 3D violence was very controversial, even though this is very rudimentary by today's standards. In the original PC release, the fact that you could run over civilians and even get points for doing so was crazy, to be honest. I mean, you will remember how controversial that was in the original Grand Theft Auto, which was a top-down 2D game. Ostensibly a top-down 2D game. Obviously, it was created in 3D scans originally, but back to Carmageddon. Yeah, so in this console release, we are looking at there is a zombie giving us the DX sign. Yeah, that just goes to take the game even more, I suppose. They were replaced by zombies. This allowed, some of these manufacturers to be a bit more on side. I mean, this was released also on Nintendo consoles in pretty much the same condition, though the 3D did look a little bit nicer, just a little bit. The zombies just helped, these big corporations kind of feel okay bringing it over, but there's still a fair amount of blood in the game. It's even zombie cows, apparently, you don't want to upset the animal lovers out there either, so we've got some zombie cows thrown in. But what makes this game bad? So why don't we first start by how did people receive this game originally when it came out? So All Game, they gave it 2 stars out of 5, so you're looking at a substandard there, but not terrible score. Official PlayStation Magazine in the UK gave this game a 3 out of 10. Now, when your official magazines give it a score as low as 3, you can probably bet that they might have been being slightly generous. So it was kind of a given that you could score the occasional half point higher in an official magazine, based purely on the fact that they needed to shift units for their respective consoles, and this was seen as a bit of a boon. Getting the one of the biggest PC releases of the year ported over to your machine was seen as a bit of a coup, and despite the limitations of the PlayStation, it was converted, at least aesthetically, fairly well. So getting a 3 out of 10, what should have been an indicator this game wasn't faring well. And then you've got to look at the game rankings percentage, which was based on a few outlets as well, which averaged the game at 34%. So we're talking about average games being a 5 point something or 50 something percent. A 34%, that's quite a bit below average. This is not considered a good game, and I'm just going to give you my impressions from playing it now. This game is a stinker, and it's mostly not because of the way it looks. It doesn't look great compared to other games from 1997. You're talking, we've already had games like Resident Evil, we've already had games like Tomb Raider, which were, in my opinion, better looking games, and racers should tend to look better than action games based on what they're having to render being predictably limited in scope, where you're going around a track. Even though some of these tracks are open, we can predict basically what we're going to have to render. So it wasn't the best looking game. It did have zombies in place of civilians. It didn't have the ability to push polygons that the PC did. But all that aside, those things don't stop this being a good game. This could easily have come out and been a very solid game with those limitations. The problem is gameplay. And gameplay is king, and if a game doesn't play well, it's usually a bad game. And this game, it doesn't play well. It does little to explain its objectives and really get you explain where you're going in the map. The popping doesn't help with that, and that is a hardware limitation. But these cars control really, really poorly, and we're not just talking about, this isn't, at the end of the day, this isn't a simulation game. It's not meant to handle like a Forza. It's meant to be arcade fun, and these cars handle terribly. They corner really, really poorly. By the look of the cars and the look of the tracks, you'd expect this to maybe control a little bit more like a Ridge Racer. Maybe not, with the absolute silky smoothness of a Ridge Racer. Obviously, that was a very good game, but it doesn't. It handles terribly, and this was released at a time when the PlayStation was, for the main part, a D-pad based system, and the PlayStation D-pad, not being the greatest, needs all the help from the programmed controls it can get, and this reacts very poorly to being controlled on a D-pad, and switching it over to an analog doesn't help much either. Holding down in either direction, there's an enormous delay to turning, and when you do turn, it seems to be a case of it will turn slightly and then suddenly turn completely all the way around, meaning you have to anticipate corners far in advance, and when you do anticipate them, often it really makes no difference. It doesn't make much difference what speed you're going. It controls really, really poorly. And with a racing game, just the way the car steers and the feedback you get from your environment through the road and the surface of the track is, in my opinion, by far the most important thing. The physics are arcadey, but are they arcadey to the point of being satisfying? Probably not. You flip out all over the place sometimes. That can be fun the first time it happens. When you realise there's no real element of control or no real element of feedback, the physics become just as annoying as the controls. Well, let's not go that far. The controls are absolutely awful. Well, guys, disappointingly, we've come up empty-handed again in our raid for the worst game. This isn't it. This game is rubbish. It's a 3 out of 10, but unfortunately, this isn't the game we're looking for.